Commander Takvan rubbed his scarred blue forehead as he read the contract for the 5th time. Something wasn't right. The Galactic Defense Consortium never paid triple rates for simple jobs, and this looked like basic mercenary work. Break into a facility, grab some data files, get out clean. He'd done hundreds of missions like this over 30 years. The money was too good to ignore, though. His mercenary company needed funds badly after their last job went sideways on the mining planet Kelthos. 3 of his best fighters were still recovering from plasma burns, and ship repairs had eaten through most of their savings. This contract could solve all their problems, but there was a catch that made his stomach turn. The client wanted to include a human soldier as part of something called a cultural exchange program. Takvan had heard whispers about these newcomers to galactic society. Most species considered them weak, emotional creatures who had somehow stumbled into faster-than-light travel just 3 years ago. The briefing room door slid open with a soft hiss. Takvan expected to see some massive warrior, or at least someone carrying impressive weapons. Instead, a human walked in who looked completely ordinary. Average height, normal build, wearing simple combat gear that seemed almost primitive compared to standard galactic equipment. "Private Li Jin reporting for duty, sir," the human said with a slight bow. Takvan's Lieutenant Vexistar made a sound that might have been laughter. The massive Gornok warrior stood nearly 8 feet tall with natural armor plating and arms that could crush steel. Next to him, the human looked like a child playing soldier. "This is what Earth sends us," Vextar rumbled, his deep voice echoing off the metal walls. "I've seen house pets that look more dangerous." Jin didn't react to the insult. He simply stood at attention, waiting for orders. Takvan noticed the human's eyes, though. They moved, constantly, taking in every detail of the room, calculating distances, noting exits. It reminded him of how predators watched their surroundings. "What's your combat experience, Private?" Takvan asked. "Standard infantry training, sir. 2 tours in the Terran Defense Forces, specialized in hostile environment operations." The words meant nothing to Takvan. Human military classifications were still mysteries to most of the galaxy. But the client was paying extra for this cultural exchange, so he'd make it work. "Your weapons?" Vextar pointed at Jin's equipment with obvious disdain. "Those look like museum pieces." Jin glanced down at his rifle. "Kinetic projectile system, sir. Reliable in most atmospheric conditions." Several team members exchanged looks. Kinetic weapons were considered primitive by galactic standards. Most civilized species had moved to energy-based systems centuries ago. The fact that humans still relied on throwing pieces of metal at high speed seemed to confirm their backward nature. Takvan pulled up the mission details on the main display. The target was a Skiran military outpost on the frontier world Kef 7. Intelligence suggested about 200 enemy soldiers, all elite, fighters with natural armor and superior night vision. The facility sat on top of a mesa, surrounded by defensive systems and difficult terrain. "Standard infiltration and extraction," Takvan explained. "We go in quiet, grab the data core, get out before they know we were there." "Questions?" Jin raised his hand. "Rules of engagement, sir. Minimal civilian casualties, military targets are fair game if they get in our way." "Understood, sir." Takvan assigned positions to his 12-member team. Each mercenary had been chosen for their species' natural advantages. The chameleon scouts could become invisible. The Gornok warriors had incredible strength and armor. The Vorthak provided tactical coordination and leadership. He wasn't sure what to do with the human. Jin had no obvious advantages, no special abilities, no advanced technology. Finally, Takvan decided to put him with the rear guard. At least there he couldn't get in the way or cause problems. "Private Jin, you'll cover our extraction route. Stay out of trouble." "Yes, sir." As the team prepared to depart, Takvan couldn't shake the feeling that this mission would be different somehow. The human's presence changed something, though he couldn't put his finger on what exactly. Jin moved through equipment checks with quiet efficiency, double-checking gear that already looked perfect. Maybe the rumors about humans were wrong, Takvan thought. Maybe they weren't as weak as everyone assumed, or maybe this was going to be the easiest money he'd ever made, babysitting one confused alien while his real team did the work. Either way, he'd find out soon enough. The mission started exactly as Takvan had planned. His team moved through the outer defenses like ghosts in the night. Kira, his best chameleon scout, flickered invisible as she disabled the perimeter sensors. The massive Gornok twins, Thox and Grex, carried the heavy equipment without making a sound, despite their 8-foot frames. Even the weather cooperated. With thick clouds blocking the moon's light, Takvin felt confident as they approached the main facility. 30 years of experience had taught him to read missions, and this one felt routine. The Skiren outpost looked formidable from a distance, but his team had cracked tougher nuts before. The key was patience and precision. Behind him, Private Jin moved quietly through the rocky terrain. The human had stayed exactly where assigned, covering their rear approach without complaint. Takvin had almost forgotten about him until the first real obstacle appeared. The patrol came out of nowhere. 8 Skiren soldiers materialized from concealed positions that even Kira's enhanced vision had missed. Their natural camouflage was perfect, blending seamlessly with the rocky landscape. Worse, they had spread out in a classic hunting formation, cutting off multiple escape routes. Takvin's mind raced through tactical options. Skirens were born killers, evolved on a world where everything tried to eat everything else. Their chitinous armor could deflect most energy weapons, and their mandibles could slice through combat suits like paper. 8 of them in good positions would require careful coordination to defeat without casualties. "Contact front," Vextar whispered into his comm. 8 hostiles, hunting formation. The Skirens hadn't spotted them yet, but they would soon. Their compound eyes were designed for detecting movement, and 12 mercenaries couldn't stay perfectly still forever. Standard protocol called for the team to take firing positions, coordinate their attack, then engage simultaneously to overwhelm the enemy before they could react. That's when Jin stepped forward. "Request permission to handle this, sir," the human said quietly. Takvin stared at him in disbelief. 1 soldier against 8 elite warriors? It was either suicide or complete madness. The human showed no signs of fear, though, just calm determination. That somehow made the request sound reasonable. "Negative," Takvin whispered back. "We stick to protocol. Sir, with respect, protocol will result in casualties. These positions are too good. They'll hurt us badly before we can coordinate proper fire." Vextar made a sound of disgust. "The human thinks he's better than our entire team." Jin's expression never changed. "Not better, sir, just different approach." Something in his tone made Takvin hesitate. The human wasn't boasting or showing off. He was stating facts the same way someone might comment on the weather. This wasn't bravado, it was professional assessment. "You have 30 seconds, Takvin decided. "If it goes wrong, we intervene." "Understood, sir." What happened next would haunt Takvin's dreams for years to come. Jin didn't charge at the Skirens or try to outfight them directly. Instead, he seemed to flow through their positions like water finding cracks in stone. The human used everything: shadows, terrain, even the enemy's own hunting instincts against them. The first Skiren never saw him coming. One moment the alien was scanning for threats, the next he was unconscious on the ground. The second warrior turned toward the disturbance just in time to walk into Jin's trap. A loose rock positioned perfectly sent the soldier tumbling down a steep slope. The remaining 6 tried to coordinate, clicking their mandibles in rapid hunting calls, but Jin had already anticipated their response. He moved to positions that forced them to interfere with each other, turning their superior numbers into a liability. When they tried to spread out, he was already somewhere else entirely. The entire engagement lasted less than 4 minutes. 8 elite Skiren soldiers, creatures bred for warfare on one of the galaxy's most dangerous worlds, lay neutralized, without a single shot being fired. Most were still alive, just unconscious or temporarily disabled. Jin checked each body with professional thoroughness, collecting useful equipment and ensuring none would wake up anytime soon. Then he returned to his position, as if nothing remarkable had happened. "Area secure, sir, ready to continue." Takvin's team stared in stunned silence. Vextar's mouth hung open, revealing rows of sharp teeth. Even Kira had materialized from her camouflage to get a better look at the aftermath. The most disturbing part wasn't the efficiency of what they'd witnessed. It was Jin's complete calm throughout the entire encounter. He'd treated life-and-death combat like routine maintenance work. How? Was all Takven managed to say. Jin looked genuinely puzzled by the question. Standard patrol neutralization, sir. Nothing special. If this was standard for humans, Takven realized with growing unease, then everything the galaxy thought it knew about Earth's people was dangerously wrong. The deeper they went into the Skiran facility, the more impossible things became. What should have been a nightmare infiltration turned into something that defied Takven's 3 decades of combat experience. Every obstacle that made him pause and calculate risks, Jin solved with methods that shouldn't have worked. The first real test came at the automated defense grid. Takven's team crouched behind a concrete barrier, studying the corridor ahead. Twin plasma turrets covered every angle, their sensors sweeping back and forth in overlapping patterns. Standard procedure would require Kira to use her invisibility, to get close enough to plant charges, a risky operation that could easily go wrong. Jin studied the setup for maybe 30 seconds, then picked up a piece of broken concrete. He threw it at a specific angle off the wall. The turrets tracked the movement, firing at the decoy. While they recalibrated, he tossed another piece at a different angle. The sensors got confused, trying to track multiple false targets. In the chaos, Jin simply walked through the corridor, staying in the blind spots created by the turret's own confusion. He reached the control panel and shut down the entire system with a few quick commands. How did you know that would work? Thox, one of the Gornok twins, asked in amazement. Automated systems follow patterns, Jin replied simply. Patterns can be exploited. The next obstacle was worse. A squad of 12 Skiran soldiers had taken defensive positions in a natural choke point. High ground, overlapping fields of fire, multiple escape routes. It was a textbook defensive setup that should have stopped any assault cold. Jin asked for 5 minutes alone with the position. Takven almost refused again, but curiosity won. Over caution. He watched through his scope as the human disappeared into the rocky terrain. What followed made no tactical sense. Jin didn't attack the position directly. Instead, he seemed to be playing with the defenders, making noise in one area, then appearing somewhere else entirely. The Skirans began firing at shadows, wasting ammunition and revealing their exact positions. Then Jin started using their own tactics against them. Skirans were pack hunters who relied on coordinated attacks, but in the confined space their coordination became a weakness. When one group moved to flank a position where they thought Jin was hiding, they exposed themselves to attacks from completely different angles. The human turned the entire defensive position into chaos without firing a single shot. The Skirans ended up so confused and scattered that Takven's team walked through their lines almost unopposed. This is impossible, Vextar muttered, shaking his massive head. No one fights like this. During their next rest stop, Takven couldn't contain his questions any longer. He pulled Jin aside, away from the others. What are you? He demanded. Jin looked genuinely confused by the question. Infantry, sir. Basic combat specialist. Basic? Vextar had followed them and now loomed over the human. You fight like nothing I've seen in 40 years of warfare. Every human does, Jin said matter-of-factly. We've been fighting our entire evolutionary history, against predators, against our environment, against each other. We assume we'll always be outgunned and outnumbered. Takven felt something cold settle in his stomach. Always outnumbered? Yes, sir. Humans never had natural advantages like other species. No armor plating, no enhanced strength, no special vision. So we learn to fight differently. We use everything. Terrain, psychology, the enemy's own instincts against them. But your weapons, Kira interjected, her voice skeptical. They're so primitive. Jin glanced at his rifle. Kinetic weapons work in any atmosphere, can't be jammed by energy shields, and the ammunition is cheap to manufacture. Sometimes simple is better than advanced. The implications hit Takven like a physical blow. Every assumption the galaxy had made about humans was not just wrong, it was dangerously naive. These weren't weak creatures trying to compensate with technology. They were something far more terrifying. Your military academies, Takven pressed, what do they teach? That every fight is unfair, Jin replied. That the enemy will always have advantages we don't. So we learn to turn their advantages into weaknesses. We study psychology, unconventional tactics, resource management. We assume we'll be fighting a losing battle and plan accordingly. Vextar made a sound like grinding metal. Your entire species thinks like this? Has to, sir. Earth is a death world. Everything there tries to kill you. The weather, the animals, the diseases, sometimes the ground itself. Humans who couldn't adapt to overwhelming odds didn't survive to have children. Takvan realized they weren't just dealing with an individual soldier. They were seeing the product of millions of years of evolution that had forged an entire species into something the galaxy had never encountered before. Apex predators who had learned to hide their nature behind unassuming appearances and emotional expressions. The most terrifying part was Jin's casual tone. He wasn't boasting or trying to intimidate anyone. He was simply explaining facts about his people, the same way someone might describe the weather. "How many humans think like you?" Takvan asked quietly. "All of them, sir. It's just how we're raised." The galaxy was about to learn that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their adaptability. It was their ability to make every fight look impossible for their enemies, while making it look routine for themselves. And they were just getting started. The central data core room should have been their moment of triumph. Instead, Takvan stared at the displays around them and felt his blood turn to ice. The intelligence had been completely wrong. This wasn't a simple military outpost with 200 defenders. It was a fortress containing over 400 elite Skiran soldiers, and every single one of them was now converging on their position. Worse yet, the mission had been compromised from the beginning. The data they'd come to steal was still there, glowing invitingly on the central terminal, but it was obviously bait. Motion sensors throughout the facility showed enemy forces moving with coordinated precision, sealing every possible escape route. "Sir, we've got contacts on all levels," Kira reported, her voice tight with fear. "They're not just surrounding us, they're boxing us in completely." Takvan's tactical display painted a picture that made his stomach drop. Red dots representing enemy soldiers filled every corridor, every stairwell, every ventilation shaft, large enough for a person to crawl through. His team of 12 was trapped in the center of a web with nowhere to run. "How long have they known?" Vextar demanded, checking his weapon's charge level. "From the beginning," Takvan realized with growing horror. "They let us get this far on purpose. They wanted us here." The implications were staggering. The Galactic Defense Consortium had either been fed false intelligence or, worse, had set them up deliberately. Either way, his team was about to be slaughtered by overwhelming numbers in a position with no tactical advantages. "Standard extraction scenarios?" he asked his communications specialist grimly, though he already knew the answer. Yara, a skilled Zenthari technician, worked frantically at her portable scanner. "Negative viable options, sir. Every exit is blocked by at least 30 hostiles. We are completely surrounded with no clear path to extraction." The sound of clicking mandibles echoed from multiple directions as Skiran soldiers began their final approach. These weren't random patrols or scattered defenders. This was a coordinated military operation designed to capture or eliminate his entire team. Takvan had been in impossible situations before, but never anything like this. His mind raced through options: fight to the last bullet, attempt to negotiate surrender, find the most defensible position for a final stand. None of them offered any real hope of survival. That's when Jin stepped forward with that same calm expression he'd worn throughout the entire mission. "Sir, request permission to create a distraction while the team extracts." Takvan stared at him in disbelief. "A distraction? There are 400 soldiers out there." "Yes, sir, should be enough to keep them busy." "Absolutely not. I don't abandon team members. We find another way, or we go down fighting together." Jin's expression remained perfectly calm, almost peaceful. "You're not abandoning me, sir. This is what we call a Tuesday." The casual tone was somehow more unsettling than any battle cry. Takvan had heard soldiers try to sound brave before they died, but this was different. Jin wasn't putting on an act for morale. He genuinely seemed to consider facing 400 elite warriors as routine. "A Tuesday," Vextar growled. "Are all humans insane?" "Not insane, sir. Just experienced. Earth has situations like this pretty regularly." Before anyone could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. The Skirrans had finished their preparations and were beginning their final assault. Through the security feeds, Takvin could see waves of armored soldiers moving through the corridors like a living flood. "We need to move now," Yara reported urgently. "They'll reach us in less than 3 minutes." Jin was already checking his equipment with methodical efficiency. "Sir, with respect, your team has families to go home to. I volunteered for this mission. Let me do my job. Your job is to follow orders, and I'm ordering you to stay with the team." Jin paused and looked directly at Takvin. For the first time since they'd met, the human's expression showed something other than professional calm. There was something in his eyes that reminded Takvin of predators he'd encountered on a dozen different worlds. "Sir, my people have a saying. Sometimes the wolf has to turn around and face the pack. This is one of those times." Before Takvin could grab him, Jin was moving toward the nearest corridor entrance. His movements had changed completely. Gone was the quiet, unassuming soldier who'd followed orders and stayed out of the way. In his place was something that moved like liquid death, every step calculated for maximum efficiency. "Private Jin, stand down," Takvin shouted. "Sorry, sir," Jin called back without turning around. "But this is what humans do. We handle the impossible so everyone else can go home." The last thing Takvin saw before Jin disappeared into the corridor was the human pulling out what looked like improvised explosives from his pack, equipment that hadn't been in any inventory report, gear that suggested Jin had been planning for exactly this scenario from the beginning. The sound of the first explosion echoed through the facility 30 seconds later, followed immediately by screams and the distinctive clicking sounds Skirrans made when they were afraid. Takvin realized with growing dread that he was about to witness something that would change his understanding of warfare forever. And possibly his understanding of what humans truly were beneath their deceptively ordinary appearances. The security monitors throughout the facility became windows into something that defied everything Takvin thought he knew about combat. On sea. Dozens of screens. He watched Jin move through corridors filled with elite Skirran soldiers like he was walking through his own home. But this wasn't the quiet, polite human who had followed orders and stayed in the background. This was something else entirely. The first wave of Skirrans hit Jin's position, expecting to overwhelm a single soldier through sheer numbers. 40 warriors in full combat armor, mandibles clicking with predatory excitement, charged down a main corridor toward what should have been easy prey. Instead, they ran straight into chaos. Jin had turned the corridor itself into a weapon. Improvised. Explosives created choke points that forced the Skirrans to bunch together. When they tried to spread out, they found the side passages blocked by debris positioned with surgical precision. Their superior numbers became a liability as soldiers trampled each other trying to reach an enemy who was never where they expected him to be. "Look at level 3, Kira whispered, pointing at another monitor. On that screen, Jin was doing something that made Takvin's skin crawl. The human had somehow gotten above a group of 30 Skirrans and was dropping small objects into their midst. Not grenades or explosives, but simple pieces of metal and stone. The Skirrans' compound eyes tracked every falling object as potential threats, causing them to fire wildly at shadows, while Jin moved unseen above them. "He's using their biology against them," Yara observed with horrified fascination. "Skirrans can't help but track movement. He's overloading their visual processing." But the most disturbing part was how Jin adapted to every countermeasure the Skirrans attempted. When they started using thermal imaging to track him, he found ways to mask his heat signature using the facility's own environmental systems. When they tried coordinated pincer movements, he turned their coordination into predictability, always being exactly where they didn't expect. On monitor after monitor, the same pattern repeated. Skirran forces would advance with overwhelming numerical superiority, only to find themselves scattered, confused, and fighting shadows, while their actual target dismantled their formations from angles that shouldn't have been possible. "This isn't possible," Vextar muttered, his massive frame trembling slightly. "One soldier can't do this to trained warriors." Then Jin demonstrated something that made even Takvin step back from the screens in shock. A full company of 60, Skirrans had cornered him in what looked like a dead-end storage room. The aliens were clicking their mandibles in triumph, certain they finally had their prey trapped. Instead of fighting or trying to escape, Jin started talking to them, not shouting threats or demands, but speaking in calm, conversational tones that the facility's communication system picked up and broadcast to their location. Within minutes, the Skirrans' triumphant clicking changed to confused chittering, then to sounds of fear. Takvin couldn't understand the words, but he could see the effect. The aliens began backing away from the storage room, their weapons lowering despite having every tactical advantage. "What is he saying to them?" Thox demanded. "I don't know," Takvin replied, but he was beginning to understand something far more terrifying. Jin wasn't just fighting these soldiers, he was getting inside their heads, using psychology as a weapon more devastating than any explosive. The breakthrough came when Takvin watched a group of veteran Skirran sergeants, warriors, with decades of combat experience, actually abandon their positions and retreat to the upper levels. These were creatures bred for warfare on one of the galaxy's most dangerous worlds, and they were running from a single human. "How is this possible?" Vextar whispered. That's when Takvin understood what they were really witnessing. Jin hadn't been hiding his abilities or pretending to be weak. He had been operating at a level so far beyond normal galactic warfare that it looked like restraint. Every polite question, every quiet acknowledgement of orders, every moment of seeming ordinary behavior had been a human apex predator, choosing not to reveal its true nature. "We're not watching a soldier," Takvin said quietly. "We're watching what humans actually are when they stop pretending to be like the rest of us." The facility's command structure was collapsing. Officers who should have been coordinating the defense were abandoning their posts. Soldiers who had never shown fear in their lives were making tactical retreats that looked suspiciously like panicked flight. And through it all, Jin moved with the same calm efficiency he'd shown throughout the entire mission. Not angry, not excited, not even particularly focused, just methodically working through obstacles with the patience of someone who had done this countless times before. "The reports were wrong," Kira said in a voice barely above a whisper. "Humans aren't trying to join galactic society as equals." "No," Takvin agreed, watching another group of Skirrans flee from an empty corridor where Jin had been moments before. "They're quietly showing us what apex predators look like when they've learned to use tools and strategy instead of just teeth and claws." The most terrifying realization was that Jin was still holding back. Despite facing 400 elite soldiers, despite being trapped in an enemy facility, despite every tactical disadvantage imaginable, the human was treating this like routine work. If this was what humans considered a normal Tuesday, Takvin thought with growing dread, what would they do when they actually considered something a serious threat? The extraction went smoother than any mission in Takvin's career. By the time Jin rejoined them at the designated pickup point, the entire Skirran facility had gone silent. Not destroyed, not abandoned, but quiet in the way that only came when defenders had completely lost the will to fight. They walked out with the data core unopposed, past guard posts that should have been manned but stood empty. During the flight, back to the rendezvous station, Takven couldn't stop staring at Jin. The human had returned to his previous demeanor, quiet, polite, following orders without complaint. It was as if the terrifying force they'd witnessed through the security monitors had never existed. Jin cleaned his equipment methodically, filed a brief after-action report, and settled in for the 3-hour journey home. But Takvin had seen too much to let it go. The questions burned in his mind like acid, demanding answers that he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. "Private," he finally said, approaching Jin's seat near the back of the transport. "I need to understand what happened back there." Jin looked up from the technical manual he was reading. "Mission successful, sir. Data retrieved, team extracted with 0 casualties." "That's not what I mean, and you know it." Takvin sat down across from him, studying the human's unremarkable face. "What you did to those Skirrans, I've never seen anything like it." "Standard crowd control techniques, sir. Nothing special." The casual response made Takvin's skin crawl. 400 elite soldiers isn't a crowd. It's an army. Jin considered this seriously. as if he was genuinely trying to understand Takvin's confusion. I suppose the numbers were higher than usual, but the principles remain the same. Your military classification, Takvin pressed, leaning forward. What exactly is your role in Earth's forces? Support specialist, sir. Logistics and technical operations primarily. The words hit Takvin like a physical blow. His blood actually ran cold as the implications sank in. Support specialist? Yes, sir. I handle supply lines, equipment maintenance, communication systems. Basic infantry training is just part of the standard package. Vextar had been listening from across the cabin. The massive Gornok warrior stood up so quickly his head nearly hit the ceiling. You're telling us you're not even a real soldier, Jin looked genuinely confused by the question. I'm a soldier, sir, just not a combat specialist. The actual warriors are much more intense. Takvin felt the universe shift around him. If Jin was support personnel, essentially a clerk with basic training, what were Earth's dedicated fighters capable of? The thought was almost too terrifying to contemplate. These combat specialists, Takvin managed to ask, how do they differ from you? Well, they train for fighting specifically. I only had 6 months of combat instruction. They get years of it plus psychological conditioning, advanced tactics, specialized equipment. Jin paused, thinking. And they actually enjoy it. Enjoy it? Kira materialized from her camouflage, unable to stay hidden any longer. You didn't enjoy what happened. Back there? Not particularly, it was just work that needed doing. Jin's expression remained perfectly neutral. Combat specialists find it fulfilling, I guess. They volunteer for the hard assignments. The transport fell silent except for the hum of engines. Every member of Takvin's team was processing the same horrifying realization. They had just witnessed what humans considered basic competency from someone who wasn't even a professional warrior. How many combat specialists does Earth have? Takvin asked quietly. In active service? Maybe 50 million. But most human civilians have some military training too, mandatory service and all that. 50 million. The number echoed in Takvin's mind like a death knell. 50 million soldiers who were more dangerous than Jin, backed by billions of civilians with military experience. Why haven't you conquered the galaxy yet? Vextar demanded. Jin looked genuinely surprised by the question. Why would we want to? Conquest is expensive and difficult to maintain. Much easier to make friends and trade partners. But you could, Takvin pressed, if you wanted to. I suppose, but it would be wasteful. Earth prefers diplomatic solutions. War is what happens when diplomacy fails. The statement was delivered with such matter-of-fact simplicity that it took a moment for the full meaning to sink in. Humans weren't avoiding conflict because they were weak or peaceful. They were avoiding it because they were so overwhelmingly powerful that war was simply inefficient. The cultural exchange program, Takvin realized, it's not about learning from us. No, sir, it's about showing what we can do without actually having to do it. Much more civilized this way. Takvin leaned back in his seat, feeling suddenly very old. Everything the galaxy thought it knew about humans was not just wrong, it was catastrophically, dangerously wrong. Earth hadn't stumbled into space travel. They had arrived as a fully formed military power that was choosing to play nice. One more question, he said. What happens when diplomacy fails? Jin's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. For just a moment, Takvin caught a glimpse of what lurked beneath the human's polite exterior. Then we stopped being polite, sir. The simple statement carried more weight than any threat Takvin had ever heard, because it wasn't a threat at all. It was just a fact, delivered with the same calm certainty that Jin used for everything else. As the transport continued toward home, Takvin realized that the galaxy was about to undergo a fundamental shift. The question wasn't whether humans would become the dominant power, but how quickly the other species would adapt to their new reality. Those smart enough to become allies would prosper. Those too proud or stupid to recognize the change would become footnotes in history. Back at headquarters on the space station Nexus Prime, Takvin sat in his office staring at a blank mission report for 3 hours. The cursor blinked mockingly. At him on the screen, waiting for words that could change everything or condemn his entire organization, to obsolescence. The standard format was simple enough. Mission objective achieved, data retrieved, 0 casualties, payment received. A few paragraphs about Skiran defensive capabilities, maybe a note about the human cultural exchange participant performing adequately. File it away and move on to the next contract. But every time he tried to type those safe conventional words, Jin's voice echoed in his memory. This is what we call a Tuesday. The casual tone of someone describing routine work while single-handedly dismantling 400 elite soldiers. His door chimed, and Vextar entered without waiting for permission. The massive Gornok looked as troubled as Takvan felt. The crew is asking questions, Vextar rumbled, settling his bulk into the reinforced chair across from the desk. They want to know if we're going to report what really happened. What do you think we should do? I think we pretend it never happened and hope the humans stay friendly, Vextar said bluntly, because if they don't, we're all dead. Takvan leaned back in his chair, considering the implications. He could write the safe report, file it away, and continue operating his mercenary company exactly as he had for 30 years. The galaxy would continue believing humans were weak newcomers, struggling to find their place among the established powers. But that belief was about to get a lot of people killed. The smart move was adaptation. Within hours of returning to base, Takvan began making discreet inquiries about human military capabilities. What he found terrified him more than anything he'd witnessed on the mission. Earth's public military statements were carefully worded exercises in diplomatic understatement. They spoke of defensive capabilities and peacekeeping forces, but the numbers told a different story. Human warships were classified as exploration vessels despite carrying enough firepower to crack small moons. Their colonization fleets moved with military precision that put most actual navies to shame. More disturbing were the economic reports. Human trade missions weren't just establishing commercial relationships. They were mapping every military installation, every strategic resource, every potential weakness in galactic civilization. All while maintaining perfect diplomatic courtesy and offering fair trade agreements. They're not trying to join our community, Takvan realized during a late-night strategy session with his senior staff. They're taking inventory, Kira flickered. Into visibility, her expression grim. My contacts in galactic intelligence are starting to ask questions. Word is spreading about what happened on Kef 7. How much word? Enough that some species are requesting human military advisors for their own forces. Others are quietly increasing their defense budgets. Takvan made his decision that night. Instead of filing a standard report, he began the most comprehensive reorganization in his company's history. Every tactical doctrine, every operational procedure, every assumption about galactic warfare needed to be reconsidered through the lens of what humans actually represented. The changes started small. New training protocols that emphasized psychological warfare alongside conventional tactics. Equipment upgrades that focused on adaptability rather than raw firepower. Most importantly, a complete shift in how they assessed threats and opportunities. Within weeks, word of Takvan's human-influenced methods began attracting attention. Other mercenary companies started requesting joint operations, hoping to learn the secrets that had made his team so much more effective. The irony wasn't lost on him. They were all scrambling to learn tactics that humans considered basic training. But the real revelation came when he started receiving recruitment offers, not from other mercenary companies, but from human organizations. Polite professional messages offering lucrative contracts for experienced galactic operatives who understood cross-species operational dynamics. The language was diplomatic, but the message was clear. Humans were building their own networks, recruiting the smartest and most adaptable members of other species to work with them rather than against them. They weren't conquering the galaxy through force. They were doing it through superior strategy and irresistible incentives. We're watching the end of an era, Takvan told his assembled team during a company meeting. Everything we thought we knew about galactic power structures is changing. We can either adapt and prosper, or cling to old assumptions and become irrelevant. The most unsettling part was how obvious it all seemed in retrospect. Humans had never hidden their capabilities. They'd simply allowed other species to underestimate them. While the galaxy focused on impressive displays of natural strength or advanced energy weapons, humans had been quietly demonstrating something far more dangerous, the ability to turn any situation to their advantage. What happens to the species that don't adapt? Yara asked quietly. Takvin thought about Jin's calm efficiency, his casual mention of 50 million combat specialists, his matter-of-fact description of what happened when humans stopped being polite. They become cautionary tales, he said finally. Examples of what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their tactics. It was their patience. They were willing to be underestimated, to be dismissed, to let other species feel superior while quietly positioning themselves for total strategic dominance, and they were almost finished. 3 months after the KEF-7 mission, Takvin's business had transformed beyond recognition. Word of his company's new effectiveness had spread through mercenary circles like wildfire. Contracts that used to take weeks of negotiation were being offered with premium rates and minimal questions asked. His reputation had shifted from reliable to legendary practically overnight. The morning the new contract arrived, Takven was reviewing financial reports that still seemed too good to be true. His company's profits had tripled, and they were being headhunted by clients who had never given them a second look before. The galaxy's power brokers were starting to understand that something had changed in the mercenary business. The contract offer made him pause mid-sip of his morning stimulant. The consortium was back with another job, but this time the compensation package was staggering. Triple the usual rates, full insurance coverage, and something that made his hands shake slightly as he read it. A full squad of 8 human soldiers as part of the cultural exchange program. 8 humans. Not one support specialist who could single-handedly dismantle an army, but 8 actual military personnel working as a coordinated unit. Takvin scrolled through the roster with growing fascination and dread. Most of the names meant nothing to him, but one caught his eye immediately. Cultural Liaison Officer Li Jin, promoted from private and now tasked with facilitating cross-species operational integration and tactical adaptation protocols. The dry military language couldn't hide what was really happening. Jin wasn't just a liaison, he was a teacher, sent to help non-human forces learn how to work alongside creatures who operated on a completely different level of warfare. "Sir?" Vextar's voice came through the comm system. "You need to see the intelligence briefings that came with today's contracts." Takvin transferred the data to his main display and felt his stomach drop. Intelligence reports from across the galaxy painted a picture of systematic change that was both subtle and terrifying. Human cultural exchange programs were now active. In over 200 mercenary companies, defense contractors were reporting unprecedented demand for human-compatible equipment and training programs. More disturbing were the incident reports. 3 separate pirate fleets had been completely eliminated by single human advisors working with local security forces. A hegemony military exercise had been disrupted when their human observers pointed out 17 critical tactical flaws that made their entire strategy useless. Corporate security firms were bidding against each other for human consultants who could revolutionize their operational effectiveness. "They're not integrating into our military structure," Takvin realized with growing awe. "They're upgrading it." The pattern was becoming clear. Humans weren't trying to dominate through conquest or intimidation. They were doing something far more effective. They were making themselves indispensable. Every species that worked with human advisors became more effective, more successful, more profitable. Those that didn't fell behind so quickly it looked like technological regression. His door chimed and Kira materialized from her camouflage. "Sir, we've got 3 more contract offers that came in this morning, all requesting human advisors specifically." "Show me." The offers were from clients who had never worked with his company before. High-end corporate security, government defense contracts, even exploration missions to dangerous sectors. All of them specified that human participation was not just preferred but required. "They're not asking for us anymore," Takvin said quietly. "They're asking for the humans and we're just the local partners." It should have been insulting, But Takvin was too smart to let pride cloud his judgment. The writing was on the wall in letters 10 feet tall. Companies that adapted to human methods were thriving. Those that didn't were losing contracts too. Competitors who offered human-trained personnel. "What's our response?" Vextar asked. Takvin didn't hesitate. "Accept immediately. All of them." "Sir? Better to be on the winning side of this paradigm shift," Takvin explained, already drafting acceptance messages. "The galaxy is changing whether we like it or not. The species smart enough to adapt quickly will survive and prosper. Those who keep underestimating humans—" He pulled up a classified report about a pirate organization that had tried to raid a human convoy 3 weeks ago. The aftermath photos showed destruction so complete that investigators couldn't determine how many ships the pirates had originally brought to the fight. "They become cautionary tales," he finished. Within hours, Takvin's company was officially part of what intelligence analysts were calling the Human Integration Initiative. It sounded like a cultural program, but he knew better. It was the systematic transformation of galactic civilization by creatures who had learned to wage war so effectively that they could reshape entire societies without firing a shot. The most brilliant part was how voluntary it all seemed. Nobody was being forced to work with humans. They were just discovering that working without them put you at such a disadvantage that you couldn't compete anymore. As Takvin signed the contracts, he realized he was witnessing the most successful conquest in galactic history. And the conquered were paying their conquerors for the privilege of being upgraded. The humans had turned submission into a premium service, and everyone was lining up to buy it. The galaxy would never be the same, and most species wouldn't even realize they'd been conquered until it was far too late to matter. The training facility on Nexus Prime had never seen anything like it. Takvin's most experienced warriors, creatures who had dominated battlefields across 3 galactic sectors, sat in neat rows like first-year academy students. Vextar, who could crush steel with his bare hands, was frantically scribbling notes. Kira flickered in and out of visibility, her advanced camouflage systems useless against her need to see every demonstration clearly. At the front of the room, Jin stood with the same calm demeanor he'd shown throughout their first mission together. But now Takvin understood what he was really looking at. This wasn't just a support specialist giving a lecture. This was a member of humanity's most dangerous species, sharing the secrets that had made them apex predators. "Traditional galactic warfare assumes you'll have advantages," Jin began, his voice carrying easily through the room. "Better technology, superior numbers, natural abilities your enemies lack. Human doctrine assumes the opposite." He activated a holographic display showing various battle scenarios. "We start every engagement with the assumption that we're outgunned, outnumbered, and facing enemies with capabilities we don't possess. This forces us to think differently." Thox, the Gornok heavy assault specialist, raised a massive hand. "But if you assume you'll lose, how do you win?" Jin smiled, and Takvin felt that familiar chill run down his spine. "We don't fight to win battles, sir. We fight to make sure our enemies can never threaten us again." The distinction seemed small, but as Jin explained the implications, the room fell silent. Traditional warfare focused on defeating enemy forces in direct combat. Human warfare focused on destroying the enemy's ability and will to continue fighting. "Take the KEP-7 mission," Jin continued, pulling up security footage that made several team members shift uncomfortably. 400 elite soldiers in a fortified position should have been impossible to overcome. But they made several critical errors. The footage showed Skiran forces moving through their own facility with coordinated precision. To most observers, it looked like textbook military deployment. "Error 1, Jin said, highlighting specific units. They assumed their numbers were an advantage. In confined spaces, large numbers become a liability. Too many soldiers trying to respond to threats means confusion and friendly fire incidents." Yara, the communications specialist, leaned forward. "But how did you exploit that?" "By making them respond to multiple perceived threats simultaneously. When you force large numbers to react quickly in small spaces, coordination breaks down. They start interfering with each other instead of supporting each other." Jin advanced to the next section of footage. Error 2, they relied on their natural hunting instincts. Skirrans are pack hunters, which makes them predictable. Once you understand their behavioral patterns, you can manipulate their responses. You were controlling them? Kira asked, her voice barely audible. Not controlling, guiding. There's a difference between forcing someone to do something and creating situations where they choose to do what you want them to do. The concept was revolutionary. Instead of overpowering enemy forces, humans manipulated them into defeating themselves. It was psychological warfare elevated to an art form. The most important lesson, Jin continued, is understanding that every enemy's strength is also a potential weakness. Superior technology can be jammed or turned against them. Natural armor can restrict mobility. Enhanced senses can be overloaded with false information. He pulled up tactical diagrams that showed how human forces had defeated opponents with seemingly insurmountable advantages. Each victory followed the same pattern. Identify the enemy's greatest strength, then find a way to make it work against them. Your species all evolved with natural advantages, Jin explained to the mixed group. Humans didn't. We had to learn to fight differently because we never had the luxury of fair fights. Vextar looked up from his notes. Every fight was unfair? Every fight was unfair against us, Jin corrected. So we learned to make them unfair, in our favor instead. As the training session continued, Takvin watched his team absorb concepts that challenged everything they thought they knew about warfare. These weren't advanced tactics or secret technologies. They were fundamental shifts in thinking that could make any force exponentially more effective. The most disturbing realization was how simple it all seemed once Jin explained it. The principles weren't complex or require special equipment. They just required thinking like a species that had never known what it felt like to have advantages over their enemies. Questions? Jin asked as the session wound down. Takvin raised his hand. How long does it take to train a human soldier in these methods? Basic proficiency? About 6 months, but we start learning these concepts as children. Games, sports, even academic competitions all reinforce the same principles. 6 months to create soldiers who could challenge the galaxy's best warriors, and they started teaching the concepts to children as play activities. As the team filed out, chattering excitedly about the new tactical possibilities, Takvin lingered behind. Jin, he said quietly, your people, this is just the beginning, isn't it? The human's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Sir, we've been in space for 3 years. Most species take centuries to establish themselves. Has major powers. And you? We prefer to work efficiently, sir. As Jin gathered his materials and left, Takvin stood alone in the training room, finally understanding the full scope of what was happening. The galaxy wasn't just witnessing the rise of a new power. They were watching the emergence of a species that had turned survival itself into the ultimate strategic advantage. The balance of power wasn't shifting. It had already shifted. Most of the galaxy just hadn't realized it yet.